The auctioneer's hammer came down with a crack that echoed through Tabitha Wallace's chest like a gunshot, and in that moment, standing on a raised platform in the center of Montrose, Colorado, with her wrists bound and her face burning with shame, she understood that her mother had finally done the unthinkable. The year was 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street where a crowd of rough men had gathered, their eyes appraising her like she was livestock, while her mother stood off to the side, counting coins with trembling fingers that showed more concern for the money than for her own daughter's fate. Tabitha's legs threatened to buckle beneath her worn calico dress as the auctioneer began calling out numbers, his voice booming across the gathered crowd. She was 19 years old, and until 3 hours ago, she had believed that despite all her mother's failures, despite the drinking and the gambling and the endless poor decisions, there remained some small shred of maternal love that would prevent this final betrayal. She had been wrong. "Do I hear $300 for this fine young woman?" the auctioneer called out, his meaty hand gripping Tabitha's shoulder to keep her steady on the platform. "Strong, healthy, good for housework or whatever else a man might need. The debt she is clearing amounts to $520, but we will start the bidding lower." Tabitha's eyes burned with unshed tears as she scanned the crowd, searching for any face that might show kindness, any hint that this nightmare might end differently than she feared. The men gathered below ranged from weather-beaten ranch hands to prosperous-looking merchants, and the expressions on their faces made her stomach turn. Some leered openly, while others maintained a clinical detachment that was somehow worse, as though they were calculating her value like one might assess a horse or a plow. Her mother, Clara Wallace, stood near the general store with her arms wrapped around herself, unable or unwilling to meet her daughter's gaze. The laudanum addiction had started small, just something to take the edge off after Tabitha's father had died in a mining accident 7 years prior. But it had grown and festered until Clara would do anything for her next dose, including accumulating debts all over Montrose to feed her habit. The various shopkeepers, saloon owners, and private lenders had finally banded together and demanded payment, and when Clara could not produce the money, they had suggested this alternative. 350, called out a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth and hands that looked like they had never been clean a day in his life. 400, came another voice from the back, this one belonging to a saloon owner that Tabitha recognized, a man known for working his girls until they were used up and desperate. The numbers climbed higher, and with each new bid, Tabitha felt another piece of her hope crumble away. She had been helping at the bakery on the edge of town for the past 2 years, earning honest wages that she dutifully brought home to her mother, never knowing that Clara was spending every cent on laudanum and cards, borrowing more and more until the debt had become insurmountable. When the men had come to their small house that morning, Tabitha had fought and screamed, but her mother had simply turned away, choosing the settling of her debts over her daughter's freedom. 500, a new voice rang out, clear and firm, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a knife through butter. Tabitha's eyes snapped to the source of the voice and found a tall man standing at the edge of the gathering, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He wore dusty trail clothes and boots that had seen considerable wear, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to the saddle and the open range. Even from the platform, she could see he was younger than most of the other bidders, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. $500 going once, the auctioneer called out, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction at having reached the minimum debt amount. That clears the principal, gentlemen. Do I hear 520 to cover the full amount with interest? 520, the man in the trail clothes said without hesitation, his voice steady and deep. 550, countered the saloon owner, clearly unwilling to lose his prize. 600, the man responded immediately, and something in his tone suggested he would go as high as necessary. His jaw was set with determination, and he stepped forward slightly so that Tabitha could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that were a startling gray blue, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The saloon owner hesitated, calculating whether this particular acquisition was worth going higher. After a long moment, he spat into the dust and shook his head, backing away from the bidding. The other men in the crowd seemed to sense that this stranger was prepared to outbid them all, and one by one they fell silent. $600 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the trail coat, the auctioneer declared, with a final crack of his hammer. Step forward and collect your purchase, sir. Tabitha's heart hammered against her ribs as the stranger moved through the crowd toward the platform. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting against the sun, and the calluses on his hands that told of hard work. He reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet, counting out bills with careful precision while the auctioneer looked on approvingly. Franklin York, the man introduced himself to the auctioneer as he handed over the money. His voice was polite but impersonal, as though this were a simple business transaction. I will need a receipt for this payment and documentation that all debts associated with Clara Wallace have been satisfied in full. Of course, Mr. York, the auctioneer said, his tone becoming more deferential now that such a substantial sum had changed hands. I will have the papers drawn up immediately. The girl is yours to do with as you please. Franklin York climbed onto the platform without another word, and Tabitha instinctively took a step back, her bound wrists held protectively against her chest. He was taller than she had realized, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who made his living through physical labor. He produced a knife from his belt, and she flinched, but he simply reached for her wrists and cut through the rough rope that had been binding them. Can you walk? He asked quietly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no lust or malice, just a calm steadiness that confused her more than threats would have. Yes, she managed to whisper, her throat dry as sand. Then come with me. We need to complete the paperwork, and then we are leaving town. He did not grab her or force her, simply turned and walked back down the platform steps, clearly expecting her to follow. Tabitha rubbed her chafed wrists and glanced once more at her mother, hoping for some sign of remorse, some indication that Clara regretted what she had done. But her mother had already disappeared, likely heading straight to the apothecary to purchase more laudanum now that her debts were clear. With no other choice, Tabitha descended the platform steps and followed Franklin York toward the small office where the auctioneer conducted his business. Her legs felt unsteady, and her mind raced with possibilities of what would happen next. He had paid $600 for her, far more than the debt required. What did he expect in return for such a sum? What would he demand of her? The paperwork took nearly an hour to complete. Franklin insisted on documentation that not only showed he had paid Clara Wallace's debts in full, but also included a statement from each creditor acknowledging that no further claims could be made against either Clara or Tabitha. He was thorough and precise, reading every word carefully before signing, and he made the auctioneer send runners to gather signed statements from each person Clara had owed money to. Tabitha sat on a hard wooden chair in the corner of the office, watching this stranger methodically ensure that every legal detail was addressed. She noticed he wore a gun on his hip, well maintained but not flashy, the mark of a practical man rather than a gunslinger. His hands, when he signed the documents, moved with surprising grace despite their size and evident strength. Finally, with all the papers in order, Franklin folded them carefully and placed them inside his coat. He turned to Tabitha and gestured toward the door. My horse is at the livery stable. Do you have any belongings you need to collect before we leave town? Leave town? The words burst from her before she could stop them. Where are you taking me? Away from here, he said simply. Away from your mother, and away from this place where people think they can sell human beings like cattle. Now, do you have belongings? A few things at my mother's house, she admitted. Some clothes, a photograph of my father, a Bible that belonged to my grandmother. We will get them. Which house? Tabitha led him through the dusty streets of Montrose toward the small, dilapidated structure on the edge of town that she had called home for the past 7 years. The walk took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity with Franklin York walking silently beside her, his long strides forcing her to hurry to keep pace. Curious eyes watched them from windows and porches, the gossip already spreading about what had happened in the town square. The house was empty when they arrived, as Tabitha had expected. Her mother would be at the apothecary, or perhaps already back at the saloon, seeking to numb whatever guilt she might feel. Tabitha pushed open the door and stepped into the dim interior, her eyes taking a moment to adjust after the bright sunlight outside. The single room that comprised their entire home was in disarray, with unwashed dishes piled on the small table and clothing scattered across the floor. Tabitha felt a flush of shame that this stranger was seeing how they had lived, the evidence of her mother's decline visible in every corner. She hurried to the corner where her sleeping pallet lay and gathered her few possessions: 2 spare dresses, some undergarments, a worn shawl, the silver-framed photograph of her father in his mining clothes, and her grandmother's leather-bound Bible. Franklin waited by the door, his eyes scanning the room, but his expression remaining neutral and non-judgmental. When she had bundled everything into a pillowcase, he took the makeshift bag from her and tested its weight. "Is this everything you want to bring?" "I do not have much," she said quietly. "Then let us go. I want to be out of Montrose before nightfall." They walked to the livery stable, where a magnificent bay gelding waited in one of the stalls, already saddled as though Franklin had been planning to leave town in a hurry. He secured Tabitha's belongings to the back of the saddle, then led the horse out into the street. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. "You will have to ride with me. I did not bring a second horse." Tabitha hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand. Once she took it, once she let him pull her up onto that horse, there would be no going back. She would be leaving Montrose, leaving everything she had ever known, riding off into the wilderness with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. A man who had purchased her like property and now owned the papers to prove it. But what choice did she have? Her mother had made it clear that Tabitha was nothing more than a means to clear debt. If she stayed in Montrose, the shame would follow her forever, and even if she could find work, everyone would know what had happened, would know that Clara Wallace had sold her own daughter. At least with this stranger, there was a chance, however small, that whatever lay ahead might be better than what lay behind. She took his hand, and his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. He pulled her up effortlessly, settling her on the saddle in front of him. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, smell the scents of leather and sage and honest sweat that clung to his clothes. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed, and she obeyed, gripping the smooth wood with both hands. He guided the horse down the main street at a steady walk, and Tabitha kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the faces that watched from doorways and windows. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry, would not let them see how completely her world had shattered in the space of a single afternoon. They rode in silence as Montrose gradually fell away behind them, the buildings giving way to open rangeland dotted with sagebrush and juniper. The San Juan Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still wearing caps of snow despite the summer heat. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, all red rock and endless sky. But Tabitha felt no appreciation for it. She was too numb, too overwhelmed by the rapid succession of horrors that had comprised her day. They had been riding for perhaps an hour when Franklin finally spoke, his voice rumbling from his chest, so close to her ear that she jumped slightly. "There is a ranch about 2 hours north of here where we can stop for the night. The owner is a friend of mine, and his wife will give you a proper room to sleep in. Tomorrow we can discuss what happens next." "What happens next?" Tabitha repeated, confused. "You paid $600 for me. Don't you already know what happens next?" She felt him stiffen slightly behind her, and when he spoke again, His voice carried an edge of something that might have been anger, though she could not tell if it was directed at her or at the situation. I did not buy you, Miss Wallace. I bought your freedom. There is a difference. I do not understand. You will, he said. Tomorrow, when you have had a chance to rest and eat and think clearly, I will explain everything. For now, just try to stay steady in the saddle. We have a ways to go before dark. Tabitha had no response to that, so she lapsed back into silence, her mind churning with questions and fears and a tiny, fragile spark of something that might have been hope. She tried to reconcile the man's words with his actions. He had paid a fortune for her, far more than her mother's debts required, yet he claimed he had bought her freedom, not her person. What did that mean? What was his true intention? The sun crawled across the sky as they rode, the horse maintaining a steady pace that ate up the miles. Franklin proved to be a considerate rider, stopping periodically to let the horse rest and offering Tabitha water from his canteen. He did not try to make conversation, seeming content with silence, and she was grateful for that. Her emotions were too raw, too chaotic for small talk. As the afternoon waned toward evening, they crested a rise and Tabitha saw a ranch spread out in the valley below. A substantial house built of logs and stone sat surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see several men working near the barn, their figures small with distance. That is the Harper Ranch, Franklin said. Samuel and Martha Harper have been running this spread for 15 years. They are good people, and they will treat you kindly. They rode down into the valley, and by the time they reached the ranch yard, a couple had emerged from the house to greet them. Samuel Harper was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard, and his wife Martha was a handsome woman with kind eyes and capable hands. They both smiled at Franklin with genuine warmth, and Tabitha felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Franklin York, you old saddle tramp," Samuel called out cheerfully. "What brings you back this way so soon?" Franklin dismounted and helped Tabitha down, his hands careful on her waist. She stood awkwardly beside the horse, uncertain of her place in this scene. "I need to impose on your hospitality for the evening, if Martha can spare a room," Franklin said. He glanced at Tabitha, then back at his friends. "This is Miss Tabitha Wallace. She has had a difficult day and could use some kindness and a safe place to rest." Martha Harper's eyes sharpened with understanding, and she stepped forward immediately, reaching for Tabitha's hand. "Of course, dear. Come inside and let me get you settled. You look absolutely exhausted." The maternal warmth in Martha's voice was nearly Tabitha's undoing. The tears she had been holding back all afternoon threatened to spill over, but she swallowed them down and managed a whispered thank you. Martha led her toward the house, while Samuel and Franklin moved away toward the barn, talking in low voices. Inside, the Harper home was cozy and well kept, with braided rugs on the floor and curtains at the windows. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and Tabitha's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she had not eaten since breakfast, before the men had come to her mother's house with their demands and their rope. Martha showed her to a small guest room with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt. A wash basin and pitcher sat on a stand near the window, and the evening light filtering through the glass was soft and golden. "I will bring you some hot water so you can wash up before supper," Martha said gently. "Do you need anything else right now, dear?" "Different clothes, something to drink." "I am fine, thank you," Tabitha managed. "You have already been so kind." Martha hesitated at the door, her expression thoughtful. "Franklin is a good man, Miss Wallace, one of the best I have ever known. Whatever brought you to be riding with him, you can trust that he means you no harm." With that cryptic reassurance, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Tabitha sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving out completely. The mattress was soft beneath her, so different from the thin pallet she had slept on for years. She looked down at her hands, at the red marks on her wrists where the rope had chafed, and finally allowed herself to acknowledge the full weight of what had happened. Her mother had sold her, actually sold her like she was property, like she was nothing more than a tool to settle debt. And a stranger, a cowboy named Franklin York, had paid a small fortune to buy her, and then claimed he was buying her freedom, not her. None of it made sense. Men did not spend $600 without expecting something in return. She had lived in Montrose long enough to know how the world worked, how women without protection or resources were exploited and used up. But then why had he brought her here, to this respectable ranch, to the care of a woman like Martha Harper? Why had he been so careful with her, so respectful, never once touching her inappropriately or speaking to her with anything other than calm courtesy? A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts, and Martha returned with a pitcher of hot water and some lavender-scented soap. Take your time getting cleaned up, dear. Supper will be ready in about half an hour. Just come to the kitchen when you are ready. Tabitha washed away the dust of the road and the sweat of fear, scrubbing at her skin as though she could erase the memory of standing on that platform, being auctioned like livestock. She changed into one of her spare dresses, then braided her long, dark hair and tried to compose herself. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a pale, hollow-eyed young woman who looked older than her 19 years. When she emerged from the bedroom, she followed the sound of voices and the smell of food to a spacious kitchen where Martha was setting dishes on a long wooden table. Franklin and Samuel were already seated, and they both stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that she had not expected. "Come sit, Miss Wallace," Samuel said kindly, gesturing to a chair. "Martha has outdone herself tonight, as usual." The meal was simple but abundant: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. Tabitha ate mechanically at first, her stomach so knotted with anxiety that she could barely taste the food. But as the Harpers kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation about ranch life and the weather and their daughter who lived in Denver, she gradually relaxed enough to realize she was ravenous. Franklin said little during the meal, but she noticed he was watching her with those calm, gray-blue eyes, as though assessing her state of mind. When Martha offered seconds, Tabitha accepted gratefully, and she saw the corner of Franklin's mouth quirk upward in what might have been approval. After supper, Samuel suggested the men go outside to smoke while the women cleaned up, but Franklin shook his head. "Actually, I need to speak with Miss Wallace. Privately, if you will permit us the use of your parlor." Martha and Samuel exchanged a glance, then nodded. "Of course, we will take care of the dishes. You two go talk." Franklin led Tabitha to a small sitting room off the main hall where two comfortable chairs faced each other near a cold fireplace. He gestured for her to sit, then settled into the other chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his expression thoughtful and serious. "I imagine you have a great many questions," he finally said. "Yes." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Starting with why you paid $600 for me if you did not intend to." "To..." She could not finish the sentence. "To use you? To force you into service of some kind? To exploit you?" Franklin finished bluntly. "Because that is not who I am, Miss Wallace. I will not lie and claim I am some kind of saint. I have done things in my life I am not proud of. But I will not stand by and watch a woman be sold into slavery, even if it is dressed up in legal language and auction protocol." "But $600, Tabitha protested. "That is a fortune. My mother's debts only amounted to $520. Why pay so much more?" "To make sure no one would outbid me," he said simply. "I arrived in Montrose this morning to pick up supplies on my way to my ranch. I was loading my saddlebags when I heard people talking about the auction. I thought at first they meant a cattle auction or perhaps a land sale. When I realized what was actually happening, He paused, his jaw tightening. "I lost my mother when I was young, Miss Wallace. She was a good woman who loved me and my brother fiercely, who would have died before allowing anyone to harm us. The idea that your mother could do such a thing, could stand there and watch you be sold, it made me angry. So I went to the auction and I made sure I won. To set me free, Tabitha said slowly, testing the words. That is what you said. Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. He reached inside his coat and pulled out the folded papers from the auction, including the bill of sale that marked her as his legal property. These documents say that I own you, that you belong to me like a horse or a piece of furniture. It is disgusting and immoral, but it is legal according to the laws of Colorado Territory. He stood and walked to the fireplace, and Tabitha watched in shock as he struck a match and held it to the corner of the papers. The flame caught and spread, consuming the documents that represented her servitude. Franklin held them until the fire came close to his fingers, then dropped the burning papers into the fireplace where they crumbled into ash. Now those documents no longer exist, he said, turning back to face her. You are not my property, Miss Wallace. You are a free woman. You can go wherever you wish, do whatever you wish. I will give you money for a train ticket to anywhere in the country, and enough extra to support yourself until you can find work. Or, if you prefer, I can take you to Denver, where there are agencies that help women in difficult situations. The choice is entirely yours. Tabitha stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. You are just giving me my freedom? With money? And expecting nothing in return? I am expecting you to build a good life for yourself, Franklin said. I am expecting you to find happiness and safety and a future that is not dictated by your mother's failures. But no, I am not expecting any kind of payment or service or anything else. This is not a transaction. This is me doing what any decent person should do when they see injustice. She did not realize she was crying until tears dripped from her chin onto her hands folded in her lap. All the fear and shame and anger of the day came pouring out in great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Franklin immediately knelt beside her chair, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and pressing it into her hands, but not touching her otherwise. I am sorry, he said quietly. I know this has been a terrible day for you, but I promise Miss Wallace it will get better. You will be all right. Tabitha buried her face in the handkerchief and wept until she had no more tears left, while Franklin waited patiently beside her chair. When she finally regained some measure of control, she wiped her eyes and looked at him through her swollen lids. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? Because someone should have done it for my mother, he said, his voice rough with old pain. And because it was the right thing to do. He stood and moved back to his chair, giving her space. You do not need to decide anything tonight. Rest here with the Harpers, eat well, regain your strength. We can talk more tomorrow about what you want to do next. But I want you to know that you have options, Miss Wallace. Your life is not over. It is just beginning. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in the Harpers' guest room, Tabitha stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had woken that morning as a daughter, however disappointed in her mother she might have been. By afternoon, she had been betrayed, sold, and auctioned. By evening, she had been freed by a stranger who wanted nothing in return, a man who had burned legal documents worth $600 without hesitation. Franklin York was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was quiet and serious, but not harsh, strong and capable, but gentle when it mattered. He had shown her more respect and kindness in a few hours than her own mother had shown in years. And he was offering her freedom, real freedom, with the resources to make a new start. But as she lay there in the darkness, Tabitha realized that she had no idea where she would go or what she would do. She had lived her entire life in Montrose, had never traveled more than 20 miles from the town. She had no family except her mother, who had made it clear that Tabitha was worth less to her than laudanum and gambling debts. She had no particular skills beyond basic housework and helping out at the bakery. The world Franklin was offering her felt impossibly vast and terrifying, and there was something else, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge even to herself. When Franklin had knelt beside her chair, when he had spoken with such conviction about giving her a future, she had felt something shift inside her chest. Gratitude, certainly, but also a strange awareness of him as a man, not just as her rescuer. She had noticed the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the strength in his hands, the deep timbre of his voice. She had felt safe with him, truly safe, for the first time since her father had died. She fell asleep with these confused thoughts swirling through her mind, and she dreamed of endless horizons and roads that led to places she could not name. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a cool breeze that promised relief from the previous day's heat. Tabitha woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the low murmur of voices from elsewhere in the house. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was preparing breakfast and humming softly to herself. "Good morning, dear," Martha said warmly. "I hope you slept well. There is coffee on the stove, and breakfast will be ready shortly. Franklin and Samuel are already outside tending to the horses." Tabitha poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching Martha work with practiced efficiency. The older woman reminded her of what her own mother might have been if the laudanum had not taken hold, and the thought made her heart ache. "Martha," Tabitha said hesitantly, "how long have you known Franklin?" Martha smiled as she cracked eggs into a skillet. "Oh, going on 10 years now. He worked for us one summer when he was just a young man, maybe 17 or 18. He was saving money to buy his own land, working every job he could find. He was the hardest worker we ever had, never complained, never shirked. Samuel said even then that Franklin York was going to make something of himself, and he was right. Franklin has his own ranch now, up in the high country near Ouray, raises cattle and horses, and by all accounts he does well at it. He seems like a very private person." "He is," Martha agreed. "He does not talk much about his past, but I know he and his brother had a hard childhood. Their mother died when they were young, and their father was not a good man. Franklin left home as soon as he was old enough and never looked back. He built himself a life through hard work and determination, and he did it without compromising his principles." She turned from the stove and fixed Tabitha with a knowing look. "He is also one of the most honorable men I have ever known. If he has told you he will help you, then he will help you. If he has made you a promise, he will keep it. You can trust him, Tabitha." The use of her first name, spoken with such maternal warmth, made Tabitha's eyes sting. "I do trust him," she said softly. "I just do not know what to do. He is offering me freedom and the means to go anywhere, but I have nowhere to go and no idea how to survive on my own." Martha came and sat beside her, taking her hand in both of hers. "Then tell him that. Franklin is a practical man who solves problems. If you are honest with him about your situation, he will help you figure out the best path forward. But you have to be willing to speak up and ask for what you need." When Franklin and Samuel came in for breakfast a short time later, the four of them sat together at the table and shared a meal of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. The conversation was light, focused on ranch matters and weather predictions, but Tabitha could feel Franklin's attention on her, as though he was waiting for her to speak. After breakfast, he invited her to walk with him outside, and they strolled across the ranch yard toward a split rail fence that overlooked a pasture full of grazing horses. "Have you given any thought to what you want to do?" he asked, resting his forearms on the top rail of the fence. "I have thought of little else," Tabitha admitted. "But I have no answers. I have never been anywhere except Montrose. I have no family except my mother, and I cannot go back to her. I have no special skills or training. I do not know how to survive on my own in a city like Denver, and the idea of traveling alone to some place I have never been terrifies me." She paused, gathering her courage, then continued, "But I do not want to be a burden to you either. You have already done so much, spent so much money. I cannot ask for more." Franklin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horses in the distance. "What if I offered you a different option?" he finally said. "What if you came to work for me at my ranch? Tabitha turned to look at him in surprise. Work for you? Doing what? I need someone to manage the household, he explained. Right now, I live alone in a four-room ranch house that I built 2 years ago. I do my own cooking, which is passable but not good. I do my own laundry, which is barely adequate. The house is always dusty and disorganized because I spend all my time working the ranch. I have been thinking for months that I should hire someone to handle the domestic side of things, but I have not made the time to look for the right person. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. The job would be legitimate work for honest wages. You would have your own room, your privacy, and your freedom. I would pay you $30 a month, which is more than fair for the area. You would cook, clean, manage the household accounts, and handle any domestic matters that arise. In return, you would have a safe place to live, good food, and the chance to save money while you figure out what you want to do with your future. If after a few months you decide you want to move on, I would help you with that, but it would give you time and stability to make decisions without desperation forcing your hand. Tabitha's mind raced as she considered the offer. It solved her most immediate problems. She would have shelter, food, income, and time to plan for her future. But it also meant living alone with Franklin on an isolated ranch. And despite his kindness and honor, the arrangement could easily be seen as inappropriate. People would talk, would assume things about their relationship that were not true. What would people think? She asked carefully. If I am living at your ranch, working for you, without a chaperone or any other woman present. The ranch is remote enough that there are not many people to think anything, Franklin said. My nearest neighbors are 5 miles away. But if you are concerned about your reputation, Martha Harper has agreed to come visit regularly and can vouch for the propriety of the arrangement. And if anyone does question it, well, my opinion is that people who judge a woman for working honest labor to support herself are not worth worrying about. He held her gaze steadily. I know this is far from a perfect solution, Miss Wallace, but it is better than sending you off alone with a train ticket and hoping for the best. At least this way you will have support and protection while you find your footing. And I give you my word that I will never take advantage of the situation, never make demands of you beyond the work we agree upon, and never compromise your safety or dignity. Tabitha looked out at the horses grazing peacefully in the morning sun, then back at Franklin's serious face. She thought about her mother counting coins while her daughter stood on an auction block. She thought about the leering faces in the crowd, the saloon owner who had bid so eagerly. She thought about how Franklin had burned the papers that claimed ownership of her, how he had offered her freedom without expecting anything in return. All right, she said quietly. I will come work for you, but on one condition. Name it. You stop calling me Miss Wallace. My name is Tabitha. For the first time since she had met him, Franklin York smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look younger and more approachable. All right, Tabitha, and you should call me Franklin. If we are going to be working together, we might as well be on friendly terms. They left the Harper Ranch the next morning after Martha had packed them enough food to last several days and had extracted promises from both of them to send word once they arrived at Franklin's ranch. Samuel clapped Franklin on the shoulder and told him he was doing a good thing, and Martha hugged Tabitha tightly and whispered that everything would work out as it should. The ride to Franklin's ranch took 2 full days of steady travel through some of the most beautiful country Tabitha had ever seen. They followed old mining roads, up into the mountains, climbing through forests of aspen and pine, past rushing streams and meadows full of wildflowers. Franklin proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and wildlife, telling her stories about the history of the region and the characters who had tried their luck in the gold and silver mines. They camped the first night in a small clearing beside a creek, and Franklin was scrupulously respectful, giving Tabitha plenty of space and privacy. He showed her how to build a proper campfire, how to set up a bedroll for maximum comfort, and how to hang food properly so that bears would not investigate during the night. They talked late into the evening, their conversation flowing more easily than Tabitha would have expected. She learned that Franklin was 26 years old, that he had indeed left home at 17 and never looked back, and that he had spent the better part of a decade working various jobs and saving every penny until he had enough to buy his ranch. He spoke about his brother, who had gone east to study law and was now practicing in St. Louis, and about his dreams for his ranch, which he hoped to grow into one of the most productive operations in the high country. In turn, Tabitha told him about her father, who had been a kind man who loved his family, and about how his death in the mine collapse had changed everything. She spoke honestly about her mother's decline, about the pain of watching someone you love destroy themselves through addiction, and about the years she had spent trying to earn enough money to keep them afloat while Clara drank and gambled everything away. I kept thinking that if I just worked hard enough, if I just earned enough money, I could fix things, Tabitha said, staring into the flames of their campfire. I thought I could save her, save us, but I could not. She was too far gone, and I was foolish to think I had that kind of power. It is not foolish to love someone and want to help them, Franklin said gently. But you are right that you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. You did everything you could, Tabitha. What happened was not your fault. His words settled into her chest like a balm, easing some of the guilt that had been weighing on her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, listening to the creek babble over rocks and the wind whisper through the pines. The second day of travel took them even higher into the mountains, and by late afternoon they crested a ridge and Franklin pointed down into a wide valley below. "That is it," he said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "That is my ranch. Our ranch now, I suppose. Since you will be living there too." Tabitha looked down at the valley spread out below them and felt her breath catch. The ranch house sat nestled against a hillside, a solid structure built of logs and stone with a wide porch and real glass windows that reflected the afternoon sun. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, all in good repair. Fenced pastures held what looked like several dozen cattle and horses, and a stream ran through the property, providing water for both livestock and domestic use. Beyond the ranch, mountains rose on all sides, their peaks magnificent against the blue sky. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is home," Franklin replied, and there was deep satisfaction in his voice. "Come on, let us get down there before dark. I want to show you the house." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. As they approached the house, Tabitha could see the care that had gone into its construction. The logs were well fitted, the chinking solid, and the roof looked new and watertight. Franklin had built this place to last, to be a real home rather than just a shelter. He helped her down from the horse, then carried her belongings up onto the porch and opened the front door. "Welcome to the York Ranch," he said, stepping aside to let her enter first. The interior matched the quality of the exterior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a substantial cook stove in the kitchen area. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was scrupulously clean, though Franklin had been right about the dust that had accumulated in his absence. "Your room is back here," Franklin said, leading her through a doorway into a side room that was nearly as large as the main room of the house she had shared with her mother in Montrose. It contained a real bed with a frame and a mattress, a chest of drawers, a small table with a lamp, and even a braided rug on the floor. A window looked out over the valley, offering a stunning view of the mountains beyond. "Franklin, this is too much," Tabitha protested. "This should be your room." "I built the house with 4 rooms for a reason," he said. "That one is mine. This one was always meant for a housekeeper or eventually for family members, and there are 2 smaller rooms that can be used for storage or future children if—" He stopped abruptly, his neck flushing slightly. "Well, for whatever might be needed in the future, the point is this is your room. It is private and secure, and you can arrange it however you like." He showed her the rest of the house, including the well-stocked pantry, the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the house, and the small cabin nearby, where his ranch hand, a quiet man named Peter, lived with his wife and two children. Peter helped with the cattle and horses during the busy seasons and was completely trustworthy, according to Franklin. That night, Tabitha cooked her first meal in the ranch kitchen, using supplies from the pantry to make a hearty stew with biscuits. Franklin praised the food effusively, and she could tell he was genuinely pleased to have a decent home-cooked meal after months of his own lackluster cooking. As they cleaned up after supper, working together in the comfortable kitchen, Tabitha felt something she had not experienced in a very long time: peace. This place, this beautiful ranch high in the mountains, felt safe and solid and real. Franklin had been true to his word about everything, and the work he was asking of her was honest and manageable. She had her own room, her own space, and the freedom to come and go as she pleased. Over the following weeks, Tabitha settled into a routine at the ranch. She rose early to prepare breakfast for Franklin before he headed out to work the property, then spent her mornings cleaning, organizing, and managing the household. She took pride in making the house truly shine, scrubbing away the bachelor neglect and bringing order to the pantry and storage areas. She washed and mended Franklin's clothes, discovering that he had been making do with shirts that were more patches than original fabric, and she made a note to add fabric to their supply list for the next trip to town. In the afternoons, she would prepare supper and then often spend time outside, exploring the area around the ranch house, sitting on the porch with a book from Franklin's small collection or helping in the garden that Peter's wife Eileen had planted. Eileen proved to be a friendly woman who was delighted to have another woman nearby, and she taught Tabitha about mountain gardening and shared gossip about the few neighbors scattered throughout the high country. Franklin was gone most of each day, working from dawn until dusk to manage his growing herd and maintain his property. But in the evenings after supper, he would sit with Tabitha on the porch or by the fire, and they would talk for hours. She learned more about his past, about the brother he missed, but understood was better off in the civilized East, and about his dreams for the future of his ranch. In turn, she found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never expressed to anyone, finding in Franklin a listener who neither judged nor pitied, but simply understood. As summer deepened into early autumn, Tabitha realized that she was happy, truly, genuinely happy for the first time since before her father's death. She loved the work, loved the ranch, loved the mountains and the clean air and the sense of space and freedom. She had gained weight, her face filling out from regular good meals, and the dark circles under her eyes had faded. She laughed more, smiled more, felt lighter, and she was increasingly aware of Franklin York as more than just her employer or her rescuer. She noticed the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders when he worked. She appreciated the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She found herself anticipating the sound of his boots on the porch in the evening, looking forward to their conversations with an eagerness that had nothing to do with simple companionship. She tried to tell herself that what she was feeling was merely gratitude, that of course she would develop an attachment to the man who had saved her from a terrible fate and given her a new life. But in her heart, she knew it was more than that. She was falling for Franklin York, falling hard and fast, and she had no idea what to do about it. One evening in late September, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Franklin had been quieter than usual all evening, seeming preoccupied with some internal debate. "Tabitha," he finally said, his voice serious, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Her heart began to pound, uncertain what was coming. "All right. Are you happy here? Truly happy? Or are you staying because you feel obligated, because you think you have nowhere else to go?" She turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "I am happy here, Franklin. Happier than I have been in years." "Why would you think otherwise?" "Because you have been here nearly 4 months now, and I realize I have never asked if this is what you really want, or if you feel trapped by circumstances." He ran a hand through his hair. a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. When I brought you here, I told you it was temporary, that you could leave whenever you wanted, but I have never actually checked in to see if you want to leave. I have just assumed you were content because you have not said anything, and that is not fair to you. Franklin, I am not staying because I feel trapped, Tabitha said firmly. I am staying because I want to be here. I love this place, I love the work, and I. She stopped herself just before saying too much, her cheeks flushing. And what? He prompted gently. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. And I value your friendship more than I can say. You have given me a life, a real life, and I am grateful every single day. If you want me to leave, if I have overstayed my welcome, then of course I will go, but not because I am unhappy or feel obligated. I do not want you to leave, Franklin said quickly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. That is the last thing I want. I just needed to know that you are here by choice, not because you think you have no other options. I choose to be here, she said softly. Every day I choose this. They sat in silence for a while longer, but the air between them felt charged with something new, something that had been building for months and was finally beginning to surface. Tabitha was acutely aware of how close Franklin was sitting, how the fading light cast shadows across his strong features, how her heart raced whenever he looked at her. Can I tell you something? Franklin asked eventually, his voice low. Something I probably should not say, but I cannot keep quiet about anymore? Yes, she whispered. I have come to care for you, Tabitha. Far more than an employer should care for his housekeeper. When I wake up in the morning, I am eager to get back to the house because I know you will be there. When I am out working the herd, I find myself thinking about what you might be doing, what you might cook for supper, what stories you might share that evening. You have become the best part of my days, and the thought of you leaving, of this house being empty again, is something I cannot bear to consider. Tabitha's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I care for you too, Franklin, so much that it frightens me sometimes. I tell myself it is gratitude, that I am confusing appreciation with deeper feelings, but I know that is not true. What I feel for you is real, and it grows stronger every day. Franklin reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. I did not plan this, he said. When I bought your freedom, I genuinely intended to help you and then let you go on to build your own life. I never imagined that I would come to love you. Love, she repeated, her heart soaring. Yes, love, I love you, Tabitha Wallace. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you find joy in simple things, how you make this house feel like a real home, how you laugh at my terrible jokes even when they are not funny. I love everything about you, and I have for weeks now, but I did not want to say anything because I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated. You have had enough people in your life trying to control you. I did not want to be another person making demands. Tabitha squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. You could never be like those people, Franklin. You are the most honorable man I have ever known, and I love you too. I have been afraid to admit it even to myself because everything happened so quickly, because our situation is unconventional, because I worried it was too soon or too complicated. But it is not too soon, and it is not too complicated. It is simply the truth. I love you. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. Then we have a decision to make. We can continue as we are, with you as my housekeeper and me as your employer, keeping these feelings private and unexpressed. Or we can acknowledge what we both know is true and move forward as something more, as partners, as a couple working toward a future together. What are you saying? Tabitha asked, though her heart already knew. I am saying that I want to marry you, Tabitha, not because of obligation or propriety or any other reason except that I love you and I want to build a life with you. I want you by my side, not as my employee, but as my wife, my partner, my equal. I want to grow old with you in this valley, to raise children with you, to face whatever challenges come our way together, but only if that is what you want too. I will never pressure you, and if you need time to think about it, I will wait as long as necessary. Tabitha did not need time to think. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. Yes, I will marry you, Franklin York. I want all of those things too, all of that future you are describing. I want to be your wife and build this life with you. Franklin stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands coming up to cradle her face with exquisite gentleness. May I kiss you? He asked, always respectful, always giving her the choice. Please, she whispered. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers, and the kiss was everything Tabitha had imagined, and more. It was tender and passionate, reverent and hungry, a promise of all the love they would share in the years to come. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. We should probably do this properly, Franklin said, his forehead resting against hers. I should take you to Ouray to meet the minister, get the banns posted, give you time to prepare. I do not need time to prepare, Tabitha said. I do not need a fancy wedding or a long engagement. I just need you, Franklin. Everything else is just details. Are you sure? Most women want a proper wedding, a nice dress, family present. I have no family worth inviting, Tabitha said firmly, and I do not need fancy things to make our marriage real. If you want to wait, I will wait. But if you are asking what I prefer to marry you as soon as possible. Franklin grinned, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. Then how about we ride into Ouray tomorrow, find the minister, and get married as soon as it can be arranged? We can invite the Harpers to stand as witnesses. It will be small and simple, but it will be ours. That sounds perfect, Tabitha agreed. They rode to Ouray the next morning, a journey of several hours through spectacular mountain scenery. The town was larger than Montrose, more prosperous thanks to the productive silver mines in the area, and it had a proper church with a minister who agreed to marry them 3 days hence, once the legal requirements had been satisfied. Franklin sent a telegram to the Harpers, who responded immediately that they would arrive in time for the wedding. Then he took Tabitha to the general store and insisted on buying her a new dress for the ceremony, something in soft blue fabric that brought out her eyes. She tried to protest the expense, but he was adamant that his bride would have at least one new thing to wear on their wedding day. Those 3 days of waiting passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. They stayed at a respectable boarding house with separate rooms to maintain propriety before the wedding. Franklin used the time to purchase supplies for the ranch and to visit the bank to update his accounts and documents. Tabitha spent time with a seamstress, making small adjustments to her new dress and purchasing a few other items she would need as Franklin's wife. On the morning of their wedding day, Martha and Samuel Harper arrived in town, greeting Tabitha with warm hugs and obvious approval. Martha helped her dress and arranged her hair, chattering happily about how she had known from the moment she saw Franklin and Tabitha together that something special was developing between them. He looks at you like you hung the moon, Martha told her as she pinned Tabitha's dark hair into an elegant style. And you look at him the same way. That is how marriage should be, built on genuine love and respect. You two will be very happy together. The ceremony took place in the small church at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with sunlight streaming through the windows and wildflowers decorating the altar. Tabitha walked down the aisle on Samuel Harper's arm, and her eyes were only for Franklin, who stood at the front looking handsome in a new suit, his expression full of love and wonder. The minister kept the ceremony brief, but meaningful, speaking about the sanctity of marriage and the commitment they were making to each other. When it came time for vows, Franklin took Tabitha's hands in his and spoke in a voice that was steady and strong. Tabitha, I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your opinions and value your contributions. I promise to build a home with you where love and laughter live, and to face whatever challenges come our way with courage and faith. You have my heart, my loyalty, and my devotion, now and always. Tabitha's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made her own vows. Franklin, I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you through all of life's joys and sorrows. I promise to be your companion, your confidant, and your greatest champion. I promise to make our house a home filled with warmth and welcome, and to build a future with you that honors the gift you gave me when you set me free. You have my heart, my trust, and my love, now and forever. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and invited Franklin to kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was sweet and pure, a public declaration of the love they had confessed to each other on the porch just days earlier. The Harpers clapped and cheered, and Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, clearly moved by the simple beauty of the ceremony. They celebrated with a wedding dinner at Ure's finest restaurant, where Samuel insisted on paying for champagne and toasting the happy couple multiple times. The Harpers told stories about Franklin's younger days and made predictions about the grandchildren they expected to meet in the future, and the whole afternoon was filled with laughter and joy. As evening approached and the Harpers departed for their journey back to their ranch, Franklin and Tabitha found themselves alone outside the church, husband and wife, ready to begin their life together. "Ready to go home, Mrs. York?" Franklin asked, offering her his arm. "I am ready for anything, as long as I am with you," Tabitha replied, taking his arm and smiling up at him. They rode back to the ranch the next day, taking their time and enjoying the journey as a newly married couple. When they arrived at the valley and saw the house waiting for them, Tabitha felt a surge of rightness, of knowing that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Franklin carried her over the threshold, another tradition he insisted on observing, and they both laughed at the formality of the gesture in their rustic mountain home. But once inside, with the door closed behind them and the rest of the world shut out, the laughter faded into something deeper and more intense. Their wedding night was everything Tabitha had hoped it would be, tender and passionate, with Franklin showing her the same careful respect and consideration he had always shown her, but now combined with an intimacy that joined them completely. He was patient and gentle, making sure she felt comfortable and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife in every sense, it felt like the natural completion of everything that had been building between them since the day he had bought her freedom. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they now shared, Tabitha reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. Just 5 months ago, she had stood on an auction block in Montrose, believing her life was over, believing she had no future except whatever degradation her purchaser chose to impose. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, living on a beautiful ranch in the mountains, with a future stretching ahead of her full of promise and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Franklin asked, his fingers trailing gently through her hair. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," she said softly. "Not just for what you did, buying my freedom, but for who you are, for your kindness and your integrity, for the fact that you gave me choice when I had none, and then you loved me when I was free to love you back. You could have taken advantage of this situation in so many ways, but you never did. You are a truly good man, Franklin York, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love." "You do not need to try," Franklin said, tipping her face up so he could look into her eyes. "You are already worthy, Tabitha. You always have been. Your mother's actions did not diminish your value, and my buying your freedom did not create it. You are worthy simply because you exist, because you are strong and kind and resilient. I am the lucky one, that you chose to stay with me, that you chose to build this life with me. I will never take that for granted." They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love and their commitment to the future they would create together. The months that followed their marriage were full of hard work and deep contentment. Autumn brought the cattle roundup, with Franklin working long days to prepare his herd for winter. Tabitha managed the household with increasing confidence, preserving vegetables from the garden, putting up meat for the winter months, and making sure Franklin had hot meals and clean clothes despite his exhausting schedule. Winter arrived early in the high country, with snow falling by mid-October and temperatures dropping well below freezing. But the house Franklin had built was warm and sturdy, the fireplace keeping the interior cozy even during the worst storms. Tabitha spent the long winter evenings reading aloud to Franklin from books they had ordered from Denver, sewing clothes for the both of them, and planning for the spring planting. They grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and preferences, developing the comfortable intimacy of a well-matched couple. Franklin taught Tabitha to ride properly, not just sitting on a horse behind him, but actually handling the reins and controlling the animal herself. She discovered she loved riding and began exploring more of the ranch property, familiarizing herself with every corner of the land they owned together. In late February, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain, then told Franklin the news on a bright March morning as they ate breakfast together. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: pure joy, excitement about becoming a father, and immediate concern for her health and comfort. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to rest more? Should we send for a doctor?" he asked, his questions tumbling over each other in his eagerness. "I am fine, Franklin," she assured him, laughing at his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong, and Eileen has promised to help when the time comes. We have months to prepare, so there is no need to panic." "I am not panicking," he protested, though his hand shook slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "I am just overwhelmed, in a good way. We are going to be parents, Tabitha. We are going to have a child." "We are," she agreed, moving around the table to sit on his lap, something she never would have done in those first uncertain months, but now felt natural and right. And he or she will be born into a home full of love on this beautiful ranch with two parents who will do everything possible to give them a good life. Franklin wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Our child will never know what it is like to be sold or bartered or treated as property," he said quietly. "He or she will grow up knowing that they are precious and valued, that their worth is inherent and not dependent on anyone else's opinion. We will make sure of that." "Yes," Tabitha agreed. "We will." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Tabitha remaining healthy and active throughout. She continued managing the household, though Franklin insisted she avoid any heavy lifting or strenuous work. As summer arrived and her belly swelled, she spent more time resting on the porch, watching the ranch come alive with new calves and foals, feeling their own baby kick and move inside her. Martha Harper visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice, checking on Tabitha's progress, and making sure everything was ready for the birth. The older woman had assisted at many births over her years on the frontier, and her calm competence was reassuring. On a warm August evening, just as the sun was setting over the mountains, Tabitha's labor began. Franklin immediately sent for Eileen and Martha, then paced anxiously outside the bedroom while the women attended to his wife. The labor was long, but progressed normally, and when the first light of dawn broke over the valley, a baby's cry rang out through the house. Martha opened the bedroom door with a wide smile. "Congratulations, Franklin. You have a son, a big, healthy, beautiful son." And Tabitha did wonderfully. "She is tired, but fine." Franklin pushed past her into the room, his eyes immediately finding Tabitha propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but her face glowing with happiness. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny baby with dark hair and a squished red face. "Come meet your son," Tabitha said softly, her voice full of wonder. Franklin approached slowly, almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the small bundle. When he reached the bed and looked down at his child for the first time, Tabitha saw tears streak down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Franklin whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Tabitha asked. Franklin nodded wordlessly, and she carefully transferred the baby into his arms. He cradled his son with surprising gentleness for such a large man, one finger tracing the baby's tiny features with infinite care. "Hello, little one," Franklin murmured. "Welcome to the world. Your mother and I have been waiting to meet you for a long time." They named him James after Franklin's brother, who sent a congratulatory telegram and a generous gift when he received news of his nephew's birth. Little James York was indeed healthy and strong, with his father's sturdy build and his mother's dark eyes. He thrived on his mother's milk and attention, growing steadily through the late summer and into autumn. Tabitha took to motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else, quickly learning to read her son's cries and needs. Franklin was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his wife and child, and already making plans for the future when James would be old enough to ride and help on the ranch. As the first anniversary of their wedding approached, Tabitha reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. She was sitting on the porch in the late afternoon sunshine, nursing James and watching Franklin work with a young horse in the corral, when she realized she could no longer remember what it felt like to be unhappy. The pain of her mother's betrayal had faded into something distant and abstract, no longer sharp and immediate. She had heard, through Martha Harper's occasional news from travelers, that Clara Wallace still lived in Montrose, still struggled with her addiction, still drank and gambled away whatever money she could get her hands on. Tabitha felt pity for her mother, but no desire to reconnect, no lingering sense of obligation. Clara had made her choices and Tabitha had made hers. Franklin finished with the horse and walked over to the porch, his shirt damp with sweat and his face flushed from exertion. He climbed the steps and sat beside her, leaning over to kiss her temple and then gently touching James's soft hair. "I was thinking," he said, "that we should take a family photograph. There is a photographer in Ouray who could come here to the ranch. I want to capture this, to have a record of our family that James can look at when he is older." "That is a wonderful idea," Tabitha agreed. "We can hang it above the fireplace. And we can take another one every few years," Franklin continued, warming to the idea. "So we can see how our family grows and changes, how many more children we have, how the ranch develops, all of it." "How many more children are you planning on?" Tabitha asked with amusement. "As many as you are willing to have," Franklin said, grinning. "I grew up with just my brother, and while I love him, I always wished for a bigger family. More siblings, more connection. I want that for James, and for any other children we might have." "Well, we have plenty of rooms in this house," Tabitha said, "and plenty of love to share. So I suppose we will see what the future brings." The photographer came 2 weeks later and spent an afternoon setting up his equipment and arranging them for the portrait. The final image showed Franklin standing tall and proud with his hand on Tabitha's shoulder as she sat holding baby James, all three of them dressed in their finest clothes, with the ranch house visible in the background. When the finished photograph arrived weeks later, Tabitha cried at the beauty of it, at the tangible proof that this was her life now, that this man and this child and this home were truly hers. 2 years passed in contentment and hard work. James grew into a sturdy toddler who followed his father everywhere, his small legs working hard to keep up with Franklin's long strides. Tabitha became pregnant again and gave birth to twin daughters in the spring of their 3rd year of marriage, naming them Sarah and Emma. The girls had their father's eyes and their mother's delicate features, and Franklin was completely besotted with them from the moment they were born. The ranch prospered under Franklin's management and Tabitha's careful household economy. They added more cattle, improved their breeding stock, and built a larger barn. Franklin hired additional help during busy seasons, and the York Ranch became known throughout the region as a well-run operation that produced quality livestock. As James approached his 5th birthday, he started asking questions about Tabitha's family, wondering why he had cousins on Uncle James's side in St. Louis, but no relatives on his mother's side. Tabitha and Franklin had known this conversation would come eventually, and they had agreed to be honest with their children when the time came. They sat James down one evening after the twins had been put to bed and explained, in age appropriate terms, about Tabitha's mother and what had happened in Montrose all those years ago. They told him how Franklin had intervened, how they had fallen in love, and how they had built their family together. So Grandma Clara sold you? James asked, his young face troubled. Like selling a cow? Yes, Tabitha said gently. She made a very bad choice because she was sick in a way that made her not think clearly. It hurt me very much at the time, but it also led to me meeting your father, which led to you and your sisters. So something good came from something bad. Is Grandma Clara still alive? James wanted to know. I believe so, Tabitha said carefully. But we do not have a relationship with her. She made her choices, and your father and I made ours. We chose to build this life, this family, and that is what matters. I am glad Papa saved you, James declared with the absolute certainty of childhood, and I am glad you are my mama. I am glad too, sweetheart, Tabitha said, pulling him into a hug. Every single day I am glad. That conversation seemed to satisfy James's curiosity, and life continued its pleasant rhythm. More years passed, bringing more children, twin sons named Thomas and Timothy, then another daughter called Ruth. The house that Franklin had built was filled with the noise and energy of 6 children, and Tabitha could not have been happier with the chaos and love that surrounded her every day. Franklin proved to be an excellent father, patient and playful with his children, but also firm when necessary. He taught them all to ride as soon as they were old enough, and he involved them in ranch work according to their abilities, instilling in them a strong work ethic and a sense of responsibility. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin surprised Tabitha with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since they had been married. They left the children in the capable care of Martha Harper and spent a week in the city, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and simply enjoying time together as a couple without the demands of ranch life and parenting. Do you ever regret it? Franklin asked one evening as they strolled through a park, enjoying the mild autumn weather. Do you ever wonder what your life might have been like if things had happened differently? Never, Tabitha said without hesitation. I have the life I was meant to have, Franklin. I have you. I have our children. I have our home. What more could I possibly want? I just wanted to make sure, Franklin said, because I know our life is not easy. It is hard work and long days and challenges that never stop. I want you to be happy, Tabitha. Your happiness matters more to me than anything. I am happy, she assured him, stopping to face him directly. Deliriously, completely happy. Yes, our life involves hard work, but it is work that has meaning and purpose. Yes, raising 6 children is exhausting, but it is also the greatest joy I have ever known. And yes, living on a remote ranch means we do not have all the conveniences of city life, but it also means we have freedom and space and beauty all around us. I would not trade any of it for the world. Franklin pulled her into his arms right there in the park, kissing her deeply despite the scandalized looks from some passers-by. I love you, Tabitha York, more today than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for setting me free so that I could choose to be with you. They returned to the ranch renewed and reconnected, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, and challenges did come, as they always do in life. There were harsh winters that tested their resources, droughts that strained the water supply, and illnesses that struck the children, despite Tabitha's best efforts at prevention. But through it all, Franklin and Tabitha faced everything together, their partnership strong and their love unshakable. When James turned 18, he told his parents he wanted to study veterinary medicine, that he loved the ranch and animals but wanted to bring more scientific knowledge to the management of livestock. Franklin and Tabitha supported his decision completely, sending him off to study in Denver with their blessing and the money they had been carefully saving for their children's futures. Sarah and Emma, at 16, were already turning heads whenever the family went to town, But they were level-headed girls who had learned independence and self-respect from their mother. They had no interest in marrying young, instead focusing on their education and helping manage the household as Tabitha had done for Franklin years earlier. The younger children continued to grow and develop their own personalities and interests, and the ranch house remained full of life and laughter and love. One afternoon, more than 20 years after Franklin had first brought Tabitha to the ranch, she received an unexpected letter. The postmark showed it came from Montrose, and when she opened it, she found it was from the minister of the church there, informing her that Clara Wallace had passed away the previous week. Tabitha sat on the porch for a long time after reading the letter, trying to sort through her complicated feelings. She felt sadness, certainly, for the wasted life her mother had led and for the relationship they had never been able to repair. But she also felt peace, knowing that she had long since forgiven Clara for the betrayal, had moved beyond the anger and hurt to build a life that honored the strength she had found in surviving. Franklin found her there as the sun began to set, and she showed him the letter without speaking. He read it carefully, then sat beside her and took her hand. "Do you want to go to Montrose, to attend the funeral or settle her affairs?" he asked gently. "No," Tabitha said. "There is nothing there for me anymore. My life is here with you and our children. Clara made her choices, and they led her down a path I could not follow. I forgive her, but I do not need to mourn her publicly. I will say my goodbyes in my own way, in my own time." "Then that is what you will do," Franklin said. "Whatever you need, I am here." That night, Tabitha took out her grandmother's Bible, the one she had brought with her from Montrose all those years ago, and she wrote Clara's name and dates on the family page where births and deaths were recorded. It was a small gesture, but it felt important, acknowledging her mother's existence while also closing that chapter of her life permanently. As more years passed, the York Ranch became a multi-generational operation. James returned from his veterinary studies and established a practice in Ouray, but he also worked closely with the ranch, applying his knowledge to improve the health and productivity of the livestock. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and moved to her own ranch 20 miles away, while Emma chose to stay at the York Ranch, managing the domestic side of operations as Tabitha gradually stepped back from the daily work. The twins, Thomas and Timothy, proved to be natural cattlemen, taking over more and more of the day-to-day ranch operations as Franklin entered his 50s. Ruth, the youngest, became a teacher in Ouray, riding to town each week to instruct the children there in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Franklin and Tabitha found themselves with more free time as their children took on adult responsibilities, and they relished the opportunity to simply enjoy each other's company. They took walks together in the evenings, rode out to favorite spots on the ranch, and spent long afternoons on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "We did well," Franklin said one evening as they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains, a sight that never grew old no matter how many times they witnessed it. "Look at what we built, Tabitha. 6 wonderful children, all of them happy and successful in their own ways. A ranch that will continue for generations, a legacy of love and hard work." "We did very well," Tabitha agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And to think it all started with you being in the right place at the right time, being the kind of man who would step in when he saw injustice." "I think it was more than timing," Franklin said thoughtfully. "I think it was meant to be. I think you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. And everything that happened was leading us to each other." "Maybe so," Tabitha said. "All I know is that I am grateful. Grateful for every day we have had together. Grateful for the family we created. Grateful for this life we built from such an unlikely beginning." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them on their first night camping together. On the way to the ranch, the same stars that had shone on their wedding day, the same stars that would continue to shine long after they were gone. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. All 6 children were there with their spouses and children, filling the house and outbuildings with 3 generations of Yorks. There was food and music and dancing, and at the end of the evening, Franklin stood up to make a toast. 30 years ago, he began, his voice still strong despite his age, I made the best decision of my life. I married a woman who had every reason to be bitter and broken, but who chose instead to be strong and loving. Tabitha, you have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. You turned this house into a home. You gave me 6 incredible children, and you have made every single day of the past 30 years worthwhile. I am the luckiest man alive, and I thank God every day that I was in Montrose that afternoon, that I had the means to intervene, and that you chose to give me your heart. Here is to 30 more years together, my love. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Tabitha stood to respond, her eyes bright with happy tears. Franklin York, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me freedom when I had none, love when I needed it most, and a future when I thought I had nothing ahead but darkness. You are the finest man I have ever known, and I am honored to be your wife. Here is to 30 more years and to the legacy we have built together. As the party continued around them, Franklin and Tabitha slipped away to the porch, their special place where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. They stood at the railing, looking out over the valley that was now lit with lanterns and torches as their family celebrated inside. It has been a good life, Tabitha said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was standing on that auction block. The best life, Franklin agreed. And it is not over yet. We have plenty of years ahead of us, plenty of grandchildren to spoil, plenty of sunsets to watch together. Promise me something, Tabitha said, turning to face him. Anything. Promise me that no matter what comes, no matter how old we get or what challenges we face, we will always remember this feeling, this love, this certainty that we belong together. Promise me we will never take it for granted. I promise, Franklin said, pulling her close. I could never take you for granted, Tabitha. You are the reason my heart beats, the reason I wake up grateful every morning. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They sealed the promise with a kiss, and as they stood there holding each other on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the love and laughter of their family, they both knew that their story had been one worth living. What had begun with betrayal and desperation had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, proof that love and hope could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The years continued to pass as they always do, bringing both joys and sorrows. Franklin and Tabitha aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining more lines, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They celebrated births and mourned losses, welcomed new grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and watched their family tree branch and grow in ways they had never imagined. When Franklin turned 70, his children threw him a grand birthday party, inviting everyone from miles around. Friends and neighbors came to honor the man who had built one of the most successful ranches in the region, who had raised a fine family, and who had lived his entire life with integrity and honor. But Franklin made sure everyone knew that all his success was due to the woman by his side, and he publicly credited Tabitha with being the heart of everything good in his life. Tabitha lived to see all 6 of her children settled and happy, to hold 15 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. She spent her final years exactly where she wanted to be, on the ranch she had come to love, surrounded by family, with Franklin by her side every single day. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74, Franklin held her hand as she took her final breath, whispering his love and gratitude for the 52 years they had shared. He mourned her deeply, but found comfort in knowing that she had lived a full and happy life, that she had been loved completely, and that her legacy would continue through their children and grandchildren. Franklin lived 3 more years after Tabitha's death, and those who knew him said he was ready to go when his time came, ready to be reunited with the love of his life. He passed away on the porch they had loved so much, looking out over the valley he had claimed and the mountains he had called home for more than half a century. At his funeral, James York, now a distinguished veterinarian in his 60s, stood before the assembled crowd and told the story of how his parents had met, how Franklin had saved Tabitha from an auction block in Montrose, and how that single act of courage and compassion had led to a love story that spanned more than 5 decades. My father taught us that one person can make a difference, James said, that when you see injustice, you do not turn away, that love and honor and integrity matter more than money or status or power. He showed us how to be strong yet gentle, successful yet humble, ambitious yet content. And he loved our mother with a devotion that never wavered, never dimmed, never failed. That is the legacy he leaves behind, and it is one we will carry forward. The ranch continued under the management of Thomas and Timothy, who ran it according to the principles their father had established. Sarah's children and grandchildren thrived on their own ranch. Emma remained the heart of the York family, hosting gatherings and keeping everyone connected. Ruth's students remembered her as the teacher who made them believe they could do anything. And all of them, all 6 children, and all their descendants, knew the story of how Franklin York had bought Tabitha Wallace's freedom and won her heart. The old ranch house still stands today, more than a century later, preserved by the York family as a reminder of where it all began. The mountains still rise majestically beyond the valley. The stream still runs clear and cold, and the land still produces strong cattle and fine horses. But more importantly, the legacy of love, courage, and redemption continues through each new generation, because sometimes in the darkest moments when all seems lost and hope appears dead, a single act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes one person willing to stand up against injustice can alter the course of a life. Sometimes love can bloom from the most unlikely circumstances and grow into something that endures far beyond a single lifetime. And sometimes, when a cowboy pays to set a woman free, he finds that in giving her freedom, he has found his own heart's home.